let's come back to not our focus so much, that, but beyond the focus are the resonances. And behind the resonances, in order to be heard as resonances, is a harmonic. And that harmonic is able to occur because of silence. Without the punctuation, there is no way to tell sound from chaos. And without the distilling of sound into the word, there's no way to tell what the sound is saying. And so, at the focus of what became energy time forms, that teacher was called the Word. For all those reasons. And it was real, is real. There's no past in real. There's no future. It's eternal. As time spontaneously emerges eternally, space instantly blossoms, and in its blossoming unfurls the gravity waves, which in terms of phenomenality are at the beginning. They're very near the beginning. Must be the beginning. The beginning of time making space. So that spatiality, has a gravitas of gravity waves from the get-go. So that the way in which the Harvard-Smithsonian discovery of just a few days ago of the ability to refine our techne, which is the Greek word for art. Our techne, the study of techne is technology, techneology, so that we can discern those gravity waves, those density waves of energy that begin to pulse in their resonances that have a very interesting, eventually, now and forever, harmonic. There is such a thing in mathematics, a whole section of harmonic analysis. It's gone very far afield into the depth and capabilities by the 21st century. Lots. The quality is mysterious enough that one of the great astronomy magazines, published in Wisconsin, of all places, Finding the Missing Universe, an issue that came out just before the confirmation and discovery. So we are living in 2014, which is a time, a date, a calendar that's within a time form. The 2014 is exactly 2,000 years from 14. What happened in 14 AD? In 14 AD, the first emperor of the world died, Augustus Caesar. And just as the emperor of the power of the world died, the coming up word teacher became the head, the president of the healers community, the Therapeutai, just to the west of Alexandria, and became the head of that in 14 AD, and delivered an inaugurating, not a lecture, but a presentation, which was witnessed by a number of distinguished people. Among them was the greatest philosophical writer of the age, Philo of Alexandria, and he recorded that presentation in a little treatise called in Latin, De Vita Contemplativa, on the contemplative life, and you can find it, the Loeb Classical Library, published by Harvard, has it in one of the 14 volumes of Philo, Greek and English and facing pages. And Philo, says of Jesus' teaching at age 23, just outside of Alexandria, that when he began to speak, there was a silence within a silence in the room, in the hall. So that silence was the silence of the world into its existentiality, and the silence within the silence was the silence of the existentiality into the cosmos of its reality. And men and women alike sharing in complementarity, in symmetry, were able to hear. And those who were able to hear had ears to hear. They come in pairs. We're looking at, in 2014, the way in which time calibration as calendars is not just a calendar of seasons, but is a calendar of dimensions. And that the distillation of dimensions does not come immediately from the seasons. There's an interface. There's an existential interface between the phenomenality of seasons and the high dharma of dimensions. And that interface, classically, now for a long time, has been called phases. So when you look at the Shared Presence Foundation website about the learning civilization, it has seasons made into phases, and then phases distilled into dimensions. A pair of years, not two, but a pair, that are able to give you a natural cycle and a conscious ecology together, so that one is able to finally hear for oneself and to learn. If you depend upon a teacher, it's only an education. But if you participate in it, it's a learning. And civilization is only existential when there is learning. And the learning is only high wisdom when it's real. That's how it is. Worlds without end. In addition to Cupid and Psyche, the 11th book is about Isis in Apuleius' Metamorphoses. And one of the studies we mentioned was Amor and Psyche, the psychic development of the feminine by Erich Neumann. And another was Marie-Louise von Franz, The Golden Ass of Apuleius, and the liberation of the feminine in man. That in the species, man, it is paired, not two, but paired. It's not like there's a 1-2. There's a pair. It is tunable by pairs. It is tunable from the sound of pairs into the melody of a pair, pairedness. And that's where man comes first into focus, is there in that existentiality, within a real that has the pairedness raised through life into love, which is cosmic, is a spirit. The way that one is stopped from this in Apuleius is that the protagonist, the man, becomes a beast. He is a beast to the beautiful of the feminine. And so it becomes something that is of an enormously important, significant way in which this can be expressed. One of the very best expressions is a great film that Jean Cocteau made of The Beauty and the Beast. Philip Glass, one of the great opera composers of all time, still alive, has an opera on the Beauty and the Beast. It is a theme of fairy tales. When one tells stories, you're in the phenomenality of the world. When one tells myths, you're in the existential shaping behind the world. But when one deals with fairy tales, you're into the cosmic spirit, where the real, that was invisible, can now be seen through the transparency. And when you go through the looking glass, like Alice in Wonderland was able to do, you look back and you don't see the world, because now the mirror is opaqued. The world itself becomes the opaque backing of what was a transparency and now is blocked and becomes a mirror. So that one faces the problem of the mirror on both sides, on the worldly side and on the spiritual side. To the spiritual side, the psychic becomes like a mirror instead of a transparency. The only cure for that is to change the speed of time into reality, where there's no speed. It's spontaneous. If you're still dealing with speed, no matter how fast, you're going to mirror one way or the other. You can learn it suddenly. You can learn it over as long as you think protons are going to last. But learn we must. The theme of The Beauty and the Beast is classically also presented in Shakespeare's figure of Caliban in The Tempest. Shakespeare's last great play is The Tempest. And the beast in The Tempest is Caliban, and the beauty is the daughter of Prospero, who's the magician of the Tempest on this island, like an island in the Bahamas, where they have been shipwrecked, and in this lost, saying they come across the mother of Caliban, who is a fearful demonic spirit. There are demonic spirits, yes, who seek to mirror their limitations. And thus it's as regressive as if you were a materialist exclusively in the world. That's the truck that carries that away. As someone once said in San Francisco in the 60s, it amounts to a lot of garbage, one way or the other. The Beauty and the Beast has an ultimate quality when the beast becomes a figure of death. And one of the great telling fairy tales, because now it's not the myth of the beast and the beauty, it's the fairy tale of, like, Black Orpheus, Orfeu Negro in Portuguese. These are two different covers, and you can see the one is about the world, the other is about the mythic, but the film itself is the fairy tale that presents the distillation, that there is a quality where the feminine is a key to the rebirth out of death, and Isis is that figure classically, especially 2,000 years ago, and especially because of 3,000 years before that, 5,000 years ago. And here's a little monograph. There are academic things that almost nobody reads because they don't know. Sometimes someone does know and reads. This is Attic grave reliefs that represent women in the dress of Isis, published by the American School of Classical Studies at Athens, published by Princeton, 1988. It isn't just Egyptians that worship the myth of Isis. It became a part of the Greek language word world. At the cusp of time forms, which conveniently can be called 0 BC, or just as conveniently be called 1 AD. It is a quality of timelessness which makes it real and not just existential, and certainly not phenomenal. One has to go to a thrice greatest scalar in order to begin to appreciate. Otherwise, one doesn't know what one is hearing. Someone just coming in now via the web or the door or whatever will not hear what is going on, will not understand the significance, but especially invisible to them for a long while is the reality. It takes incredible patience, the patience of Job, the fortitude of Job's wife to see that one has to see through and go through and be not there, but be anywhere, anywhen. Last week we had handouts, as we have every week, and we have the title page of The Virgin of the World, which is a Hermetic treatise on Isis, which has been an esoteric quality of the Hermetica and was not included even in the classic Hermetica because it was a part of the real and not a part of the wisdom. It was high Dharma. And the Virgin of the World has a very interesting frontispiece, and it is Hermes Trismegistus wrapped in this kind of ultimate feminine, mythic figure. And this figure, at the beginning of the Virgin of the World, because this translation, the first time in English of the Virgin in the World, by Anna Kingsford, and we will talk about her next week in depth, was able to see something that is existentially there, that the Virgin of the World was this statue, this mythic figure, and is a mythic figure, of Artemis. And one can see that in the next plate, here's Artemis. The same way. The many breasts are the mythos of the mother to all. And all of the other elements have the significance. Artemis had her own city. Her city was Ephesus, in what then was the Roman province of Asia. It's now a part of Turkey. Ephesus was a huge city at the time. It was about the fourth largest city in the world at the time. And that figure, the face of Artemis, has the mystery of her gaze, is not in the mythic, but is in the real. She's seeing through, not only through the world, but through the mythos into the real. Because it was there that the figure of Artemis, who is the feminine sister of Apollo, that she was the huntress. And she is the huntress of the ways in which one can help women survive childbirth, of the ways in which women can survive the travail of the world to be able to preserve love and life, and that one of her iconic mythic accoutrements was a hound, a hunting hound. And this particular hound is the last bit of a fragment found, with the statue of Artemis being completely smashed into bits, like Osiris. And this fragment was found in the far west country of England. And it was smashed in the 300s AD. And the accompanying edifice, temple, was completely dismembered at that time. And so all that was left were ruins. And after some 1700 years, it was finally investigated. And before we go to too many more presentations, we'll take a look at this site, which is not very far from the Bath in England, which was the scene of Jane Austen's novels and many other things. There are mysteries, but the reality behind the myth of Artemis, behind the Isis phenomenality of Greek women wearing Isis dresses at funerals to ensure that the love is remembered, that the life is rememberable, and that reality remembers. It's important for us because there was a woman who lived in Ephesus near the energizing of the turn of the time form. She lived there from 36 AD to 57 AD. She didn't die, the phrase at the time, hermetically true and real. She went to sleep. And she was not buried in a tomb, but she was placed in a holding sarcophagus in the Cave of the Seven Sleepers. It's one of the few sites, holy, because it is mentioned not only in Christian literature, but it's in the Quran as well. The Cave of the Seven Sleepers is all about rebirth. It is this rebirthing that is a quality that the Virgin of the world is able to bring into play. One of the most important ways, almost like a rule of thumb, one holds up a thumb to get a perspective. One holds the thumb as that perspective's way of being able to grasp and do the manipulable detailing, to hold the pen, to make sure that one is able to express. And it is that rule of thumb that is important. Apuleius based his metamorphoses on a metamorphosis that came about a century and a half before he wrote that, and that is the Metamorphoses of Ovid. This was written and finally published in the scrolls of the time, 8 AD, by Ovid in the Roman Empire. And when his Metamorphoses in 15 books was published, it was a cause célèbre. The Roman epic of its founding was by Virgil, the Iliad turned into the Aeneid. But the Metamorphoses is Homer's Odyssey turned into the metamorphosis not of the founding of Rome, but of the transformation of the Roman Empire. Because Homer's Iliad is about the war that men make among themselves to the death, not only to the death, but to the desecration of the other men. We will not only kill you, which is how Achilles vowed after his best friend Patroclus was killed by the great Trojan hero warrior Hector. Hector thought that he had killed Achilles because Achilles held himself out from the war, from that battle. His favorite squeeze, as they say, his girl of the day was Briseis, and the head warrior Agamemnon took Briseis for himself, and pouting, Achilles gave his armor to his friend Patroclus, and when he was killed by Hector, Hector thought he had killed Achilles and gloated. And so the next day, Achilles went in his armor and not only killed Hector, but he tied the body, the corpse, to the back of his chariot and rode 3 times around the enormous spread of Troy, shredding and dusting and completely obliterating the body of Hector so that there was only shards left that Hector's father came to claim. The subtitle of the Iliad, forever, since it was written 3,000 years ago, is The Wrath of Achilles. The wrath of the strong, talented man who can always win in terms of the world, in terms of power. There always is an Achilles, head of the pack. But coming back from that 10 years of immersion into that war, none of the Greeks was able to make it home without scathing. And the only one who was able to come back and regain his kingdom, in a way, was Odysseus. And the Odyssey by Homer is about Odysseus not going through terrible masculine things, but encountering the wave after wave after a wave, the resonances of the feminine, so that the harmonic of the last resonance of waves in the Odyssey is he must come face to face with Penelope. But before he does, there is a penultimate, one step before the ultimate, of having to face his wife Penelope. Perfect balance. Penelope. He has to come face to face with Athena, who has been the mythic reality behind his ability to survive the Odyssey, to have his homecoming after the Iliad, after the Trojan War. And he tries his spiel on her when he wakes up from having been put ashore while he was asleep, exhausted by the Phaeacians, with all of his treasures and so forth. And he sees this feminine, and he immediately starts to spiel her. Oh, I'm a merchant traveler from Crete. And she looks at him with her horizon, infinite, balanced, gray eyes, like the sea at its vanishing into the horizon. And she says, do not lie to me. I know who you are deeper than you do. It is Athena. And because he can awaken to her, he has opened the gate so that he could be real with his wife Penelope. And she, after her testing of him, in terms of his ability to still love, yes, he can have life. He is really the great warrior, not Achilles. Odysseus is able to slay with just his young son, 21 years old, Telemachus, and an old servant whom he tells, in this hall are 101 suitors for my wife. They're eating me out of house and home, and one of them, Antinous, wants to be the top wolf. I am the top wolf. Just lock the doors so they can't get out. And Telemachus says, but there are too many. And Odysseus says, we have allies. The spirits of the real penetrate through the existential phenomenality as if it wasn't there. He slays all of the suitors. His bow is so difficult to make taunt that none of the suitors can make it taunt. He's arranged 12 axe heads in a row in the hall, and one needs to win Penelope by shooting an arrow through all 12 axe heads. The axle of the axe heads has a shape like that, almost like a bone spinal marrow. And on that were the double axes. The double axe origin goes back to Minoan times. The Minoan Greek word for that double axe is labis. And the palace of he who controls the labis was called the labyrinth. Rinth is ancient Greek, linear B Greek, for palace. And so the labyrinth was the place of the palace of the authority of power. And one had to shoot through 12 gates, 12 phases of this center of the gates of power of civilization. No one could string the bow. They couldn't even, not just pull the bow, they couldn't string it. And so Odysseus strings it in one movement. And when he does, he brings his hand back, twanging the bow, and it sounds so taut that it's like a temple bell of doom. that brings silence to the entire hall of carousers, and quickly sends an arrow through the 12 and sends the next arrow through the throat of Antinous, who is silenced before he can shout. It is this quality of Homer that Virgil sought to build the Roman Empire on, mythically. It is Ovid who in the Metamorphoses showed the transformation of the Roman Empire into the field of the real, if one can go through the Metamorphoses. He begins in the beginning with the 4 ages of man. That was the standard Roman Empire culmination, the gold seal of power. There are 4 ages to man. There's a gold age, there's a silver age, there's a bronze age, then there's an iron age of decay, and it takes a really strong man to then bring the golden age back again. That's how he begins the Metamorphoses. But the end, the 15th book of the Metamorphoses, is all about the founding of Rome in a wisdom way, not by Romulus and Remus, but by the first wise king of Rome, Numa, and his relationship through the centuries to Pythagoras. And so the 15th book goes from the 4 ages of man to the eternity cosmos of Pythagoras. Very soon after that, Ovid was banished to where he would no longer be able to speak with anyone the beautiful classic Latin that he had. Augustus Caesar personally exiled him to the city on the Black Sea coast of what is today Romania, and he was left there for the rest of his life. Even when Augustus was replaced by Tiberius Caesar, the banishment held. It was not just a banishment from Rome or from the Roman Empire. It was a banishment from the language where anybody read or wrote Latin. And so he was put incommunicado, as it were, symbolically. In Moby Dick, Ahab is speaking with Starbuck. And Starbuck says to him, "Careful, Captain Ahab, thou gettest very close to blasphemy here." And Ahab stares at him with a severity, with his top hat black and long coat black. And he says, "Starbuck, I would smite the sun if it insulted me." More next week.